The story begins on the streets where a fair is being held. Our protagonist, a 14-year-old boy named Pio Wool, is satisfied with what he's gathered. Now that he has what he needs, he has to find somewhere to sleep for the night. Wool is an orphan who wanders the land aimlessly. As he makes his way out of the fair, he runs into a mysterious man. Wool feels afraid as he senses this is a dangerous man. His intuition was correct. Wool wakes up in the darkness. There isn't a single ray of light. He tries to move, but he quickly realizes he can't. He can't muster any strength to get up. He starts shedding tears as he tries to figure out how he ended up in this situation. All he can remember was his encounter with that mysterious man earlier. He remembers the man saying he looks useful. Wool figures out he must have something to do with why he's there. He doesn't recall making any enemies, so he concludes the man must have some sort of goal. Wool is not sure how much time has passed, so he tries testing his memory. Though he was an orphan, he can remember his age, his name, and the names of both his parents. At this point, he's been in the dark so long he doesn't even know if he's awake. He begins to cry. He's scared and lonely, and doesn't know how much longer he'll have to endure. Wool hasn't even had anything to eat, and starts to believe he will either die of starvation or insanity. He wonders if the man's plan was for him to die of starvation. Wool starts crying again, as he feels he has not done anything to deserve this torture. But suddenly, Wool gets a sensation in his hand. He can't believe it. He finally has some movement, and is also having an easier time breathing. His bodily senses are returning. He can smell the damp air and feel the cold ground. This leads him to conclude he's underground. And off into the distance, he can hear water. Wool tries to gather the strength to move his body so he can drink some water. He struggles to overcome the paralysis and drags himself towards the sound of water. Pio Wool knows he has to survive. He summons his inner strength and keeps moving. He finally reaches a stone wall where a small stream of water trickles down. He gulps down what he can, but in the dark, he cuts his finger on a sharp rock. Feeling hopeless, Wool collapses and loses consciousness. He wakes up to a presence near him, but it is only a hallucination of himself. His conscience questions him why he is fighting so hard to live. It tells him his life is not worth the struggle. It urges him to give up and find peace. Wool wonders if he would be at peace if he died, but he doubts it. He wants to live. His conscience tries to dissuade him, saying he is wasting his energy, but Wool knows he would not be at peace if he died like this. He wants revenge on the one who did this to him. Wool resolves to stay alive and get his revenge. His conscience asks him if he is sure about his choice, and Wool yells yes. His conscience smiles, as it has succeeded in giving Wool a push to not give up. Wool manages to sit up and reaches for the wall again. He feels the moss on the surface and tries to eat it. The moss tastes awful, but it does not make him sick, so he eats some more. Wool is ready to do whatever it takes to survive. He needs to remind himself of his goal so he does not quit. Wool gains enough energy to stand up and walks around the room. He estimates the space is about 9 square meters. As he walks, he hears an iron door open. Wool tries to shout for help, but he only sees a shadow of someone leaving him food. He smells the food and recognizes the fish, pork, and tea leaves. Wool realizes he has received different kinds of leftovers, and guesses there are more than one person involved. There must be 5 or more people trapped with him for some reason. Wool cannot figure out why, but he cannot resist the hunger and eats the food. He prefers the scraps to the moss he had before. After finishing his meal, he needs to think of a plan. 4 months have passed, and he has used this time to increase his strength. They give him food once a day and never utter a word. He has not seen any sign of a possible escape. He thought he would go mad in this situation, but his eyes are adapting to the darkness. He can now see parts of the space around him. Sometimes he wishes he couldn't, though, as he realizes he is not alone. He notices something in the corner of his eye and thinks it is just another insect, but he is wrong. It is a snake. The snake grabs his arm and hisses. It looks at him and bites his arm. He screams in pain as the venom burns his flesh. His whole body feels like it is on fire. The pain is unbearable, but all he can do is lie on the ground and suffer. His meal arrives and he hopes eating will restore some of his health. He refuses to give up, no matter what. Time passes, and he faces the snake again. He feels his body changed during the detoxification process. One improvement he noticed is his vision. He can see things in front of him more clearly now. He reaches out his hand towards the hissing snake, believing that the snake bite has made him stronger. He has heard of stories like these before. He hopes he can become resistant to the snake's venom and maybe gain a weapon. He lets the snake bite him again. He feels his body burning, but the pain is not as intense as before. He looks into the snake's eyes, which have lost their sight in the darkness. Even though its eyes are bright, it is a remarkable hunter that uses its stealth to devour its prey. Sometimes it even uses sound to stun its prey. Snakes are often misunderstood. They are not greedy. After they eat, they don't scare away their prey by threatening them. The snake slides away, leaving him with a new skill. Suddenly, the ground shakes, and he can't believe what is happening. The door has opened. He runs to the door and sees more rooms along the hall. He peeks into one of the rooms and smells rotting flesh. He examines the body and guesses the person is about his age. He wonders if the other rooms are the same. Wool walks down the hall and reaches the door again. The handles and bolts are gone, but he manages to push the doors open. On the other side, he sees a boy and a girl who look lost. He ignores them and searches the other rooms. He sees more dead bodies and the girl finally speaks. She asks him who he is and where he came from. She can't see him in the dark. Wool tells her his name and says he was locked in the next sector. He asks for their names and she says she is Yayo and the boy is Song. Wool doesn't care about anything else and orders them to follow him. He says there must be more places like this and runs into another door a few meters away. They follow him and find another group of people on the other side. They are all stunned to see each other. But Wool notices that there are fewer people who died of hunger in this sector. The people here chose to end their lives instead. He also sees more food bowls here than in his sector. Wool wonders why they were treated differently. Yayo gets his attention and says this group was trapped around the same time as them. They keep walking and reach another underground area with a door. Wool opens the door and they are blinded by the light. They think they are going outside, but then they realize it is a torch. When their eyes adjust, they can't believe what they see. It looks like an underground village. They walk to the buildings and see they are empty. Wool thinks they were built in a hurry because they are weak. As Wool tries to figure out the reason for this village, one of the girls from the new group calls him. Her name is Min. She says she will stay with him from now on. Min moves closer to Wool and asks about his eyes. He doesn't know what she means, since there are no mirrors in the village. She says his pupils are red, and he guesses it's from the snake bite. Min tries to find out what he's thinking, but he keeps quiet. She keeps talking and says he's not like the others. Yayo cuts in and asks what they're doing. Min says they're just chatting, and Yayo says the others have agreed to team up. Yayo asks if Wool will join them, but he's not sure he wants to. Yayo and Song are hurt, but Wool says he's not ready yet. She has to respect his choice. Min is keen to join the group, but Wool knows they've been cut off for too long. Their thinking is not clear. Wool walks away and watches from a distance. He sees several cliques have formed. There's a group led by Aeon, a group led by Kong, a group led by Jung, a group led by Sand, and then there's Wool, an outsider. The other groups talk and eye Wool with suspicion. They think he might have killed everyone in his sector, and that's why he's alone. Wool doesn't care about them and walks to one of the walls. He thinks this underground hideout must be new, judging by the moss on the walls. It must have been made by someone very rich. A hole opens in the ceiling, and everyone looks up. A basket full of food comes down. Some of them rush to grab it, but Yayo stops them. She says they should share it fairly. Wool says he wants his part too. He reaches for the food, but Jung blocks him. Jung says he controls the food and no one can take it without his permission. He doesn't know he just made a big mistake. Wool pulls back his hand and pokes out Jung's eyes. Everyone is shocked as Wool throws Jung to the floor. Wool challenges Jung to say anything else, but Jung can only scream in pain. Wool doesn't stop and pushes his fingers deeper. The others are terrified of Wool now. Yayo asks Wool to let him go. Wool says no at first, but Yayo promises no one will touch his food. Wool gets up and glares at Jung. He takes his food and walks away. Time passes and Wool watches them from a distance. He eats and thinks they are being tested. He thinks the tests will continue until the captor gets what they want. Yayo comes to Wool and asks how he is. Wool knows he has no allies here. But he tells Yayo he's been observing them. He knows Yayo is important to the others. She eats the least and gets the most food for her group. She's the most prominent leader. Yayo asks Wool if he still sleeps in his dark room. Wool says he does, because he's trying to build up his resistance to the venom. The snake bites don't hurt him anymore. As he talks to Yayo, the ceiling opens and their meal arrives. But when the basket lands, they're puzzled. There's hardly any food. Yayo is shocked, but Wool expected this. It begins, he thinks to himself. The hunger crisis continues, and the lack of food has started a war. Mac is a boy who survived the final sector. He's a member of Yayo's group. He was the smallest of the group and pulled his weight through his sheer tenacity. But unfortunately, Mac was found lifeless. Yayo's group took the loss hard, but everyone knew he died because he was the weakest. Yao and Song vowed to avenge Mac's death. They plan to do so in the same exact way Wall knows the weakest of another group will be eliminated next. After Mac came a member from San's group. This was still just the beginning. Every night someone was found lifeless. Someone from Yayo's group, someone from Young's group, someone from San's group, and someone from Kang's group. All trust was gone, and everyone became a savage. Meanwhile, Wall doesn't have to worry about the food shortage because he'll always have his secret moss. He still hasn't gotten used to the taste, but he's willing to do whatever it takes to survive. So far, the others haven't made their way to Wall's dark room, but this is about to change as Wall hears voices coming from down the hall. He senses at least 4 of them, and he knows their intentions. No one walks through the dark for nothing. Young and a few members from his group are plotting to eliminate Wall. Young feels this is the perfect time to take revenge. But as they were walking, one of Young's members felt a sharp pain in his leg. He falls to the ground as the snake slithers away. His body could not withstand the snake's venom, and he passes away quickly. Young gets angry and begins shouting for Wall. Wall sneaks up behind one of the members and puts him in a chokehold. Young is even more furious now and commands Wall to let go of his friend. Wall contemplates whether or not it'd be a good idea to take his life for a second, but then he proceeds to snap his neck. Wall has eliminated all of Young's men, and Young finally rushes at him. He comes up empty with every attack and loses to Wall. Wall sneaks up behind him and says he won't be taking just one eye this time. Young scrambles a little bit, but asks Wall to wait. He tries to negotiate with Wall and offers to join forces. This confuses Wall, but Young argues Wall won't be able to survive much longer without him. Young senses Wall doesn't like that offer, and counters with agreeing to be his minion. Wall approaches him and says there's no way he could trust him. Young tries to defend himself one last time, but Wall doesn't care. Wall crouches down and releases a huge uppercut on Young. He proceeds to put Young in a chokehold, and he chokes him out. Wall says to himself the reason he took Young's life is because he feels that he is still too weak. After Wall's encounter with Young and his confidants, the rest of his group was disbanded. The other leaders knew it had to be Wall's doing. The leaders discuss and wonder how strong Wall could be. The one thing they know is they don't want to be his enemy. San continues to discuss with his group how far the problem has gone. There's no solving the distribution of food. People are killing to secure food. In the end, everyone has become a murderer. And they know now that Wall has taken out Young. No one will touch him. San turns to Hizu for a potato, but he tells everyone to get ready. San and his group head over to the Red House and see the pair with their potato. The group can't wait to move in as they are apparently willing to do anything for a potato. San orders them to attack. The pair sees the group rushing at them, and they try to run, but something feels off to San. With their position, they're at a disadvantage. One of the kids holding the potato sends out a signal by whistling, and out come the members from Yayo's group to attack. San shouts for his group as they get whacked. San tries to get his group to retreat as they have fallen into a trap, but behind San are more members rushing in on him. San is circled, and out comes Yao and Song. They know they have the potential to reduce the amount of mouths to feed right now. San begs them to spare his life at least. Yayo says she'd like to, but they can't afford that much food. San gets worried, and Yayo says he would have done the same if he were in her position. Yayo turns away and orders her team to eliminate them all. As she walks away, she looks up and sees Wall still watching from afar. Wall has learned some of Yayo's tactics, battles using terrain, various shortcuts and tricks, and building placements which make infiltration impossible as long as there is competent security. Yayo just uses this area exactly how those who made it intended it to be used. Wall believes they're trying to use him in a terrain like this someday. And if there's a large house like this, that means this is the manor of a large clan of a very influential figure. The consequences will be massive if they attack this place recklessly. Wall concludes that's why they're using him. He is a tool they can throw away after using once. He was thrown into hell and his nature has been demolished. He is being raised to be an assassin. After eliminating San and his group, members from Yayo's group are rejoicing. They are happy to be on Yayo's team, and Yayo believes no one would dare mess with them now. But from afar, Men is upset. She's upset everyone has gotten so used to murder. Men doesn't understand how they could eat so freely with blood on their hands. Meanwhile, the ceiling begins to open up. Everyone is surprised as this delivery is a little earlier than usual. Yayo orders her group to secure as much food as possible. She's ecstatic as she feels they will finally have enough food to fill their stomachs. But she notices Wall from the corner of her eye. He's not as excited as everyone else and seems wary of something. And when Yayo looks back, she sees why Wall had that look on his face. Instead of a basket of food, masked men have jumped down from the hole. Everyone's confused for a second. But then the masked men immediately start beating them. As everyone's getting beat, Wall lays down and takes cover. He decides not to make a move because he doesn't want to draw attention to himself. Wall then notices the real ones that are commanding the masked men. The real ones halt the beating and the leader introduces himself as the First Sword. He announces to the kids that their lives are now in his hands, and there are no exceptions. One of Yayo's members tries to protest, and instantly suffers the consequences. Wall grimaces as he knows things are about to change. Later on, the real ones are meeting behind closed doors in the village. They are discussing curse poison. When you place poisonous organisms, if they do not crush her spirit, she will become much harder to deal with in the future. The First Sword demands that Yayo receive special attention. He doesn't want her to even dream of a rebellion. The Second Sword says Sung and Kang are also worth paying attention to because of their outstanding martial arts. Then the First Sword asks of the sole survivor from Sector 1, Wall. The Second Sword notifies him that Wall is still alive. The First Sword is impressed as Sector 1 had the least amount of food and the poorest conditions. He wants them to pay very close attention to Wall as well. As the meeting ends, the First Sword thinks to himself how there are only 6 years left to complete their mission. The Blood Shadow group was given an assassination mission with a duration of 7 years and a reward of 500,000 yang. The only condition was to not leave a single trace related to the Blood Shadow group behind. For the next round of training, one of the masked men announces the group's next objective. He says the one who reaches the flag at the top of the house the fastest will receive a 2-hour break, and the one who reaches the flag last will be taught what true hell is. The race was on. The merciless days continued for the trainees. Their days were filled with non-stop training. They had to do whatever it took to survive, especially if they wanted to see the outside world again. And of course, the winner of the race was Yayo. The real ones discussed the challenge from afar. They know Yayo's intelligence is outstanding, and her guts are top-notch. The First Sword asks about Wall, and the Second Sword reports that Wall is average. He hasn't shown anything that distinguishes him from the rest. This surprises the First Sword, but he wants them to keep watching Wall. Later on, Yayo approaches Wall. She's confused as to why he's still reviewing the thunder-splitting cultivation technique, though the instructors are no longer making them read about the technique. Wall felt like reviewing it anyways. Yayo doesn't see the point and heads to bed. Wall recalls the lesson from the real ones. They said the thunder-splitting cultivation technique is a technique that they should be able to learn in 3 months if they acquaint themselves with the first process. Their body will be reborn as one that can feel chi and accumulate internal energy. Wall feels that the others, along with the instructors, don't grasp the full concept of the technique. Since it's not humanly possible to physically split thunder, the concept may be referring to the speed of your thoughts. Wall thinks if he can learn the technique with this interpretation in mind, he should be able to gain something different than he has already. But he still must never show how much he's learned. He cannot stand out for being too exceptional or too lacking. Everything has been going according to plan until Wall is forced to dodge a blade going for his throat. Wall can't believe one of the other trainees actually tried to kill him. Wall asks why he's doing this, and Yoke responds, saying he wants to have some fun. Wall considers taking him up on his challenge as the instructors seem like they couldn't care less. Wall draws his blade and Yoke rushes at him. Wall dodges every attack and is surprised by the amount of effort Yoke is putting into this fight. He won't give up the fight, and Wall has had enough. Wall begins countering and the instructor is now impressed. But Yoke wants Wall's best effort and now Wall is left with no choice. Wall drops his knife and kicks Yoke right in the chest. As these two are fighting, the first sword is discussing with the second sword how fast the group has improved. The second sword thinks they only need 5 years instead of 7, but the first sword is disappointed with how much his second sword has underestimated their target. Their target is the man who possesses the most talent in all of Sichuan. Wall completely manhandles his opponent. Wall snaps his arm, and the boy drops down in tears. The real ones wait to see what happens next, and Wall does nothing. Now, one of the masked men approaches Wall and asks if he did this. Wall replies yes, and a sword is instantly drawn to his neck. Wall didn't even see the sword come in and was shocked that a human could move so quickly. Wall is panicking as he wonders if he did something wrong, but the masked man pulls his sword back and says to Wall, "An assassin must never leave a trace behind under any circumstance. Leaving a trace by breaking an arm like that is nothing more than letting your opponent know of your identity." He wants Wall to keep this in mind for the future. Wall lets out a huge sigh of relief as the masked man walks away. 6 years later, one of the masked men is walking through the village. He's looking for the trainees as their objective is to hide from him. He spots one and warns him that he'd be dead if this were real. He moves on to search for more. The trainer knows no matter how much they've learned, an inexperienced assassin's turtle-breathing technique is bound to be noticeable. He easily spots another, and that's another failed test. He continues walking as his goal is to find the last person in this zone. The masked man scans the area, but he can't find anyone. He feels someone may have made a mistake and said there was an extra person in this test. He calls for someone to come out if anyone remains. And to his surprise, right next to him is Wall. Wall has clearly passed this test and asks for a break. Wall is granted his break, but the trainer is still in disbelief. Wall returns to the house and finds Yayo and the others. Yoke is excited to see him and asks what he's doing there. Wall is annoyed by the different faces Yoke makes and tells him he's going to forget what his real face looks like one day. Yoke says it doesn't matter as they'll never leave this place anyways. But Yayo interrupts and says the quality of the food has been getting better. She believes they'll be given their mission soon. We see the first sword, exhausted and maskless, reflecting on the progress they have made in the last 6 years. In the cave, they have trained 30 out of 300 people into assassins who could probably kill him at any moment with their skills. He feels his death is near and becomes emotional. Then, the second and third sword enter the room. They ask the first sword why he has taken off his mask. He says he feels suffocated by it after 6 years, and lets them do the same. They gather at the table and celebrate how their time in the cave is almost over. The first sword then asks for an update on the trainees' performance. The second sword reports that they have surpassed their expectations. Some are even stronger than the instructors. He says it is a pity to use them only once, but the first sword says they have no choice. That was one of the mission's conditions. He wants to start the final stage and puts 3 journals on the table. They call the trainees and announce that 3 of them must learn a martial art technique from the journals, and the other 27 must assassinate them. This creates confusion among the group. The masked men say this is their last training. Once they finish it, they will not force them anymore until they leave the cave. The group wonders if this is true, and Wolf thinks hard about his next move. The ones who learn the martial art will be hunted by the others, and the technique is probably much more advanced than what they have learned so far. He gets greedy, and volunteers first. Yayo is shocked, and asks Wolf if he really wants to be the bait. Wolf replies and says he will find out if he is a bait or a wolf. Yayo warns Wolf to be careful, as he is now the main target. Time passes, and we see the second of the 3 who learned the martial art fall. After Wolf volunteered, no one else did, and the group had to draw lots. Song feels guilty about what he just did, but he had no choice. Wall is the only survivor among the 3 who learned the technique. Song goes back to the others and Min asks him about Wall. They haven't seen him for a while and wonder if he escaped outside. Yayo doubts it and says the last time she saw Wall was when they trained together a few days ago. Yolk proposes to attack the instructors instead, as that might be easier than killing Wool. Song agrees, but suspects the real ones have some kind of restriction on them. Yayo says they can deal with the restrictions later and need to concentrate on finding Wool first. They leave the cave and Wool watches them the whole time. He is surprised to hear that they considered going after the instructors rather than him. Wool realizes the instructors might be chasing the others, and there is no way they didn't hear their conversation. He thinks this is his opportunity to find out the real one's goal. Wool heeds to the real one's base. The base is heavily guarded, but Wool can handle it. Wool knows that by combining the turtle breathing technique with the thunder splitting technique, he can move without being noticed. Wool passes by the guards without any trouble. He reaches the deepest part of the base and assumes that what he is looking for is in this room. Wool opens the door and walks in. He starts looking for any clues to uncover any secrets. Then he finds a golden tube. He unrolls the scroll and sees the terms of their mission. They have to assassinate Wu Gunsang within 7 years for a reward of 500,000 yang. He is shocked and wonders how powerful Wu Gunsang is for them to train assassins for 7 years. He wants to know how one man's life is worth the lives of 270 people. Wool then hears someone coming and knows he has to get out fast. The first sword is rushing down the hall. As soon as the first sword breaks in, he can tell someone was in the room. Wool tried his best to tidy up, but it was sloppy. The second and third sword enter the base and meet the first sword. The first sword says someone has infiltrated their base and they have to find them before they escape. They try to guess who could have done this, but then they realize that no one is as talented as Wool. But they are clueless and don't even know Wool is hiding right above them. They are amazed that Wool would have the nerve to infiltrate their base when everyone else is after him. They talk about punishing Wool, but are afraid of a possible rebellion. The first sword says he has no choice but to use the Hell Flute. The second sword is shocked and says that is supposed to be a last resort restriction. The first sword asks if they are on board with the plan, and the second and third sword agree. Shortly after, the first sword stands at the edge of the cliff. The trainees have no idea what is about to happen as they are still looking for Wool. No one can find him, not even their best trackers. They suddenly hear the sound of an instrument. The sound causes a sharp pain in their bodies. They all fall to the ground and scream in pain. As they lie on the ground crying, Wool arrives. He feels no pain as the others feel their bodies burning. Wool concludes that they have activated the restriction. Wool looks around and sees everyone else in pain. He wonders why he is the only one pain-free. Wool wants to figure out the cause and decides to use internal energy infusion on Min. It is a very risky act, but it won't clash as much since Min has also learned the thunder-splitting cultivation technique. Wool performs his analysis on Min and sees no problems with her internal energy. He continues to look for any differences between them. They share the same food, same environment, and same martial art. Then it hits him. Poison. The restriction has something to do with poison, and now it makes sense why Wool feels no pain. He has developed a resistance to poison after being bitten by the snake so many times. Wool still wonders how they could affect 27 bodies at once. He thinks they must have mixed cursed poison in their food and are activating the poison through sound. He hears them call out for him and tries to think quickly. Wool decides not to run because he doesn't want them to find out about his resistance. He still doesn't want them to know he is different. So he lies on the ground and pretends to be in pain. They find Wool lying on the ground and call for the first sword. The first sword draws his blade and strikes down on Wool. The first sword wants to know what Wool was doing in his room. He also says, Wool has done a great job hiding his true talents. The first sword pulls his blade out and says, a nuisance like him is better off dead, but the second sword pleads with him not to. He says they need Wool to complete their mission. The first sword responds angrily and says the other trainees are enough. They both know that isn't true though. The second sword says they can control Wool by using the flute since he is clearly helpless against the curse poison. The first sword likes that idea and tells the masked men to give everyone the antidote. After the antidote, everyone recovers but they don't understand what happened. The first sword announces that the pain they just felt was all because of Wool and this would have never happened if he didn't infiltrate their base. He warns them and says if anyone ever steps out of line again, remember the pain they experienced today. Later on, we see Wool reflecting on the events that transpired. He recalls the real ones believing he was helpless against the poison. He is satisfied the snake venom neutralized the curse poison and allowed him to avoid the restriction. But once again, Wool hears footsteps down the hall. Min and the others are looking for Wool. Yayo can't believe Wool spends his time in this filthy place training. Yayo thinks Wool has no choice but to isolate himself, especially after the real ones blamed him for everything. Yoke gets impatient and shouts for Wool. Wool appears out of thin air and asks why they are looking for him. Wool scares them all and he asks again. Yayo says they just want to talk. She wants to know about the restriction. Yoke knows that. Wool knows about the restriction and says he wasn't there when everyone else collapsed. But when everyone regained their senses, he was right next to them. That means Wool appeared after the restriction was activated. Yayo figured out that the restriction had little to no effect on Wool. Then Min remembers when she was in pain. She was able to endure it because someone infused internal energy into her. She wonders if that someone was Wool. Yayo pressures Wool again and asks if he knows. Wool finally admits that he does. He tells them that he knows exactly what kind of restriction they put on them. Yolk demands that he tell them what it is, but Wool doesn't want to and asks why he should. Why should he go out of his way to help them? What is the benefit for him? Yolk gets angry and says, "This is not how someone treats their comrades." Comrades? Wool asks. Comrades wouldn't chase and attack each other with such hatred. He says. Yolk sees Wool's point of view and swears. From now on, they can be comrades. No matter what happens, he will always consider him a friend. Everyone sees through that, and Wool says he has to do more to earn his trust. Yolk praises Wool's attempt to act tough and says Wool would only benefit from having a friend like him. He invites him to the public floral performance troupe if they ever regain their freedom again. This way, Yolk will be able to help him at least a little. Yayo joins in and says she will also consider Wool a friend if he helps. She also adds that everyone in her group will never show him hostility. Min, feeling left out, says she will never betray Wool. Feeling fed up with all these lies, Wool spits out that the restriction is cursed poison. They ask for clarification. Wool says they were all poisoned by cursed poison. It is a type of poisonous organism. It normally stays dormant in their bodies, but it releases poison in response to the sound waves of the hell flute. The poison flows through their blood vessels and attacks their internal organs. Yolk then asks how Wool could resist the poison. Wool says he is naturally resistant to poison, so it doesn't affect him much. He says he has told them everything they need to know, and they can figure out how to remove the cursed poison on their own. Wool doesn't want to give them the full truth, as that could create countless variables. Yayo thanks him for the information and says he can come to her if he ever needs anything. Wool says he might take her up on that one day and they turn away. But Min catches Wool and tells him her real name is Lee Sol Min. Wool doesn't understand why he needs to know that, but she says she just wants him to remember it. Later on, the First Sword announces that they will be leaving the cave today. The trainees are happy to hear that, but they are still not sure if that is true. The First Sword calls for Yeo and tells her she is responsible for leading the others outside. She understands her mission, and the basket descends from the ceiling. As the real ones leave, they wonder how many of their trainees will survive. They trained them well, but their target is a martial artist with the highest level of talent in the Jianghu. The First Sword is relieved, though, as his job is now done and he can retire. The real ones make it outside and the trainees are ecstatic. This is the day they have waited for so long. Yayo takes charge and begins building their exit. Wool is relieved, but still feels it is too good to be true. Yayo walks up to Wool and asks him if he's ready for their mission. He says he is, and asks about the curse poison. Yayo says they were detoxified because Min knew a lot about poison. Most of the others have already left, and Yayo says it's their turn to go. The basket drops one last time, and they get on. As the basket rises, Wool looks down at the place he spent the last 7 years in. They were so deep underground, it might have been hell. They get close to the exit, and Wool thinks to tear off his sleeve. They need to cover their eyes as they haven't seen daylight in years. The others realize they could be blinded and do the same. The light gets stronger as the basket rises, but they finally make it out. Before they can even look around, a man approaches the basket. "We seem to have made some useful ones," he says. Wool's eyes still haven't adjusted, and the man says the requester will be satisfied. He can't see him, but Wool thinks his voice sounds emotionless. He assumes this man is in a high position from the way he talks. He must be the captain of the Blood Shadow group, Wool thinks. Wool is right. He is Gu Yang, the Blood Shadow group captain. Gu orders them to be taken to the Clear Wind Manor. As they are being taken to the carriage, Wool looks back at Gu. He has memorized his voice. They reach the manor and Gu tells the trainees that this is where they will get used to the outside world. He warns them not to let their guard down, or he will deal with the consequences. Wool is placed in a dorm with Go and Yoke. Wool tells his new roommates that he's going to wash up at the well. Wool bathes and feels refreshed. He lies in the grass and enjoys the beautiful nature. He spends the night out in the grass and wakes up to a beautiful day. The others admire a flower they have never seen before. They can't believe they lived to see something so beautiful. But as they are rejoicing, here comes the captain. Gu drops some weapons on the ground in front of the trainees. He says they will now be given weapons, and they need to keep them safe. They will be using them soon, he says. Later on in the palace, we see Gu and the First Sword having a meeting. Gu is thanking his uncle, the First Sword, for all his hard work. The First Sword says he was just doing his job. Gu says the Blood Shadow group is prosperous thanks to the First Sword's hard work, and asks how he can repay him. But the First Sword says there is no favor to repay. If it weren't for the previous head, he would be dead. Gu then grants his uncle the option to retire, and the option is also available for the Second and Third Sword. These are the words the First Sword has waited 7 years to hear. He then admits to his nephew that the trainees are a waste. They are too talented to throw away after one use. Gu shares the same belief, but he says he has no choice. The relationship with the trainees has to end here. The First Sword asks Gu if he knows who requested the mission. Gu says he doesn't know, but there is no reason to question anyone willing to pay 500,000 yang for a request. Gu then imagines the Blood Shadow group becoming the greatest assassin group in the world. Completing the mission would put them ahead of the 100 Wrath Union. After the meeting, we see Wool preparing for his mission with Yoke and a few other assassins. Yoke asks Wool if he's nervous, and Wool says he is a little. But they have spent so much time together now that Yoke can tell when Wool is lying. Wool accuses Yoke of being nervous because of how much he is talking as usual. Yoke gets defensive. Yoke says he wants nothing more than to get revenge on someone for his last 7 years of suffering. The group of assassins are now called to start their mission. They are told they will now be moving stealthily somewhere. This is what Wool has been waiting for. They head out into the night and follow the Fourth Sword. The newly trained group is keeping up with the Fourth Sword, and he is impressed. They have clearly been trained well. He also thinks how much of a waste their talent would be after being used once. They reach their target location, and the Fourth Sword tells them to hide here for now. The assassins all hide, and the Fourth Sword tells them their target lives within that mountain. He explains the mission and says once they climb the mountain, they will see a manor that looks exactly like the one they were living in underground. Among the buildings, the man inside the Bright Moon Palace is their target. The assassins are eager to get started as they know that building well. Wool is the only one in the group who knows their target is Wu Gunsang. We are now brought to a woman staring off into the distance. Her name is Young. She is admiring some flowers and one stands out to her. She reaches out to touch it, and the flower instantly evaporates. As Young processes what just happened, she hears someone calling for her. It is Solran, the emissary sect leader, and she wants to know what Young was doing outside alone. Young says she was just trying to catch the nice breeze. Ran asks Young if she still holds a grudge against her. Young says not really, but her life is on the line with this request, and she would have preferred to be excused from it. Ran is annoyed and doesn't appreciate Young's attitude. Ran tells Young she must have forgotten who took her in when she was just a beggar on the streets. She says she better not want to be excused after everything she has done for her. Young apologizes and doesn't want Ran to be upset, as it is bad for her health. Ran says if they don't get an answer today, they will carry out their original plan. Young agrees, as she is always ready to follow her master. As the conversation ends, A messenger comes running with news. The messenger tells Ran that they have accepted the proposal. This is great news for the sect, and Ran tells Young the fate of their sect now depends on her performance. Young assures Ran that she has nothing to worry about. Ran thinks to herself how disappointed she is that she has to waste a talent like Young as a political tool instead of her successor. The messenger asks Ran what they should do about the other matter. Ran asks if he is referring to the request for 500 Sindan Yang. Only time will tell what Ran has in store for the Blood Shadow group. We now see Wool waking up and wondering if it is still morning. He knows the mission will be carried out at night, so they still have some time left. He lies back down to rest, but something feels wrong to him. Suddenly a spear drops down and strikes one of the other assassins. Wool is shocked as he and the other assassins are under attack. We see a monk named Yu spiking his spear into the ground, trying to detect something. He pulls his spear out and confirms his suspicions. He has discovered that assassins are hiding around the mountain. He looks to his men and says, "The Ching Chong sect is being invaded. We must find and eliminate all the assassins." Wool knows that he and the others are at a disadvantage. They decide to retreat and survive. The monks begin to spear random areas in the ground, hoping to find an assassin using their special abilities. But one of the monks gets too close, and the assassins leap into the air. They plan to scatter and regroup once they escape the encirclement. The monks are not going to let them go easily and pursue them. Yu throws his spear ferociously and hits one of the assassins. He calls for another spear and quickly kills another assassin. He takes another spear and gets another assassin. This is almost too easy for Yu. Wool's partners are falling like flies and Mola is the only assassin left. Yu makes his last throw and it's heading right for Wool. Wool catches the spear and throws it back. The spear flies past the other monks and it's heading right for Yu. As the monks turn to watch the spear fly past them, Wool takes this as his chance to attack the group of monks closest to him. The spear is heading to Yu so fast that it grazes his ear. This infuriates Yu and he orders them to hunt Wool down until he is dead. Wool is outnumbered now without his partners and decides to run away. As Wool runs for his life, he wonders how the monks knew they were hiding. He thinks someone may have leaked the information, but he is the only one who knew who their target was. It could have been the Fourth Sword, or one of his subordinates. They retreated before they were ambushed. The monks catch up to Wool and wound him with a spear. Wool falls down, but he struggles to get back up. He didn't spend 6 years underground to lose his life like this. Wool wonders if there was a conflict in the Blood Shadow group, or if the requester changed their mind. The only thing he knows for sure right now is that the Blood Shadow group has abandoned him. Wool reaches the end of the path and has to hide, but he is leaving a blood trail. As one of the monks tries to follow Wool's trail, Wool drops down from a tree and takes him out. He is forced to survive on his own with a group of monks chasing after him. With no other choice, Wool jumps into the river. He gets out of the water and finds a message on one of the stones. The message gives directions to a location 600 meters north. Wool follows the trail and sees another message with a shorter distance. Wool is closing in on the location. With the amount of blood on the rocks, Wool believes whoever wrote this code is badly injured. But in the distance, Wool hears people searching for him. Wool starts to wonder if these messages are a trap. He knows there are at least 7 different clans participating by the amount of uniforms they are wearing. Suddenly, Wool feels danger and falls down to avoid a strike. As he lays flat, he looks up and sees Men. She didn't realize she was attacking Wool. She is happy to see him, but she is badly injured and collapses. Wool tries to catch her, but he can't with how much she is bleeding. He doesn't think she is going to make it. He asks where the others are, and she says most of them are dead. Wool asks about Yayo and Song, but Min says she doesn't know what happened to them because they all scattered. She remembers them taking charge and telling their group to run while they fought. They were leaders until the very end. Wool gets emotional as his friends are losing their lives. He lays Min down and tells her she is going to die soon. She knows, but she is happy she won't die alone. Wool asks her if she is scared to die and if she wants to live. Min says she wants to live and asks if Wool can save her. He says he can't and Min says that's why she is giving up. She knows her body is in bad shape. Min is just glad she won't have to die alone. She asks Wool if he will stay with her until the end. Holding back his tears, he says he will. Min says after everything they went through to survive, it's hard to believe this is how it ends. She wants to know who did this to them and why anyone would do this. She hopes whoever did this to them feels the pain she feels right now. Wall tells Min it was because of Wu Gun Sang. Min asks for clarification on what Wall meant by that. Wall says their target was Wu Gun Sang of the Qingchang sect. Someone requested the Blood Shadow group to kill Wu Gun Sang. That's why they were kidnapped and raised as assassins. And now that they are useless, they are trying to erase them from the plan. Wall tells her if he can survive, he can find out who ruined their lives. He plans to find them and take revenge, even if it's the last thing he does. Min can barely understand as she feels the end coming. She tells Wall that she wants him to survive for her dying wish. She wants Wall to say her name, her full name. He grants her wish, and she thanks him. Min just wanted to hear Wall call her name. As Gu reads the message, he says it's a waste to throw the assassins away after all that time. The assassins won't even be useful because Gu has received a message saying their objective is now void. The fourth sword asks if that means the palace is in danger. Gu says they won't be able to find this place. He thinks it will be best to wait there until the storm is over. Then the fourth sword asks if Gu really doesn't know who the requester is. Gu says he can find out, but there is a line to be respected. Gu is not worried as they were kind enough to send them a message. But then the fourth sword sees the message and he panics. The message was infused with tracking incense, and suddenly one of the walls is blown up. The palace is now under attack. The first sword tries to warn the attackers and tells them to retreat as they are no match, but they refuse to back down. The fourth sword tells Gu that they must retreat, but Gu says he can't go anywhere. They are here for him, and they won't let him escape. Gu says they crossed the line and he prepares to fight back. Gu charges at them and says they will be devoured if they bite. Gu calls for his forces to hold on a little more, but in the distance, Gu hears someone say, "No, you won't have that opportunity." An attack is directed towards Gu, but he is able to defend. He felt a surge of power and asked who that person was. The woman was offended that a lowly assassin wouldn't know her name. As she got closer, Gu recognized her as the life-ending toxic heart Zhenghua. As Gu was about to ask if she was the requester, she stopped him and said that she would rip his tongue out if he said more. Gu figured it out and realized the requester was from the Emi sect. He regretted not investigating who the requester was. This choice had brought a disaster, but he refused to die. Zhenghua was annoyed by Gu's hope and launched another attack. Gu defended again and fought back. Zhenghua was impressed by Gu's martial art level. She was glad they were fighting in daylight, so Gu couldn't ambush them using the darkness of the night. She knew she had to kill him and everyone else in the Blood Shadow group. Zhenghua sent one final blast at Gu, and he couldn't defend that one. He knew he was going to die and feared this was the end of the Blood Shadow group. He thought about the hard work he put into this group to rival the 100 Wrath Union, and this inspired him to keep fighting. He attacked Zhenghua again, but then suddenly a third party joined in. He knew he was in trouble, and he couldn't withstand the attack. Gu fell down and the assassins cried out for their captain before getting speared. Zhenghua turned to her master, Ran, and greeted her. Ran couldn't believe they had such a hard time killing these measly assassins. Continued to cry and accused Ran of betrayal, but Ran had enough and quickly killed Gu. Ran acted confused like she had Nain. The first sword knew that ever since Ran became the leader, they had been increasing their forces at an alarming rate. He asked for the name of the woman who just sliced through him. She told him her name was Young. He said he heard that one of Ran's disciples had unfathomable talent, and it must be her. Young said those were exaggerated rumors. The first sword took his last breath and thought it was ironic that being an assassin for decades was no match for a disciple of the Emi sect. Young went to report to her sister that the first sword had been killed. Now we see the fourth sword being brought to Ran. Ran asked him how many assassins he took to the mountain. He didn't answer and asked why she wanted to know. She demanded the answer, but he said he didn't know. The fourth sword said even if he knew, he wouldn't tell her, especially not after everything she had done to his palace. Ran thought his stubbornness was cute and tortured him. She asked her question again, and the fourth sword said he took 28 assassins. Ran got what she needed and asked how many assassins had been killed on the mountain. The woman said 24 had been killed. Ran wanted the 4 remaining ones eliminated immediately. As the palace burned, Ran turned to Young and said her role was now more important than ever. Ran said she would send someone to the Qingchang sect to set a date as soon as this matter was dealt with. She also told Young to prepare her heart and body for the wedding. Ran tells Young that all of this is for the fate of the sect. Meanwhile, back on the mountain, we see Wool spying on the monks. Their security is tight at the entrance, so he plans to get in from the inside. He thinks if they want to die as natural enemies of the Jianghu, he will just become one, a natural enemy of the Jianghu. Inside their base, we see a monk getting ready to leave to collect herbs. As the monk walks in the forest alone, he is attacked and choked by Wool. He tries to ask Wool who he is, but Wool draws his sword on him. Wool injures him, and the monk wonders who would do such a thing on this mountain. Wool asks the monk if he is a disciple of the Qingchang sect. The disciple nods, and Wool lets him go, so he can ask him more questions. Wool asks for the disciple's name, and he says his name is Du. He is a third-generation disciple of the Qingchang sect. Wool asks Du what kind of man Wu Gunsang is. Du panics and asks if he is talking about senior brother Wu Gunsang, the Lone Star of Qingchang. Wool wants to know what Du meant by calling him the Lone Star of Qingchang. Du says senior brother Wu Gunsang is the greatest prospect that the Qingchang sect has ever produced. He mastered most of the Qing sect's martial arts and has reached a very high stage. Du has heard that former masters of the Qingchang sect have shown interest in him and are giving him their teachings. The Qingchang sect's prospect, Wool thinks to himself. Now he understands why they spent all that time training. Du asks Wool to spare his life since he has told him everything he knows, but when he turns around to look at Wool, he gasps. Wool is transforming, and Du is scared for his life. He has no idea what Wool is doing, and when he looks back at Wool again, he sees himself. Du is confused and tries to figure out what Wool is planning. Back at the monk's base, the guards at the front are surprised to see Du has returned so quickly. Du says he is back because he forgot something. Du walks through the entrance, and it feels like a new world to him, and that's because it is. Wool has morphed himself into the disciple Du. Wool makes his way through the base and searches for Wu Gunsang's residence. Wool quickly finds where Wu Gunsang lives in the Qingchang Palace. We see a meeting being held. The Qingchang sect leader is asking if the situation outside has settled down. His second-in-command, Jin, says the tracking of the assassins is almost over. The sect leader is still shocked that mere assassins dared to attack their sect. Jin says someone must have planned this. The sect leader asks if he knows who could have planned this, but Jin says they lack information, but he sent some disciples to gather information. Then the sect's greatest warrior chimes in and says this act is unforgivable. He wants to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. Jin assures him not to worry. Then the sect leader reminds everyone of the war of heaven and demons. In the moment of danger, when the Jianghu was about to be overrun by the Celestial Demon Union, the extraordinary martial artist Li Go formed the Providence Alliance. Those who opened their doors to participate, the Shaolin Temple, the Wudun sect, and the Mount Hua sect, accomplished great feats and regained their former glory. And those who sealed their doors and did not participate, such as the Qingchang sect and the Emi sect, only earned the empty name of Great Family of Sichuan and cannot compare to them in reality. The sect leader says, if they want to catch up to the others, they cannot hold back and must stay focused. Jin reassures everyone not to worry. He says if things go according to plan, they will be caught up in a few years. The sect's greatest warrior likes the sound of that and asks how Jin's son, Wu Gunsang, is doing. He knows he hasn't shown himself to the outside world at all. As far as they know, he has isolated himself to focus on his training with the thought of atonement. Jin apologizes for not being able to raise his own son. Well, the sect's greatest warrior says it's all right. It's understandable for a boy his age, and there's no need to apologize for something that has been resolved peacefully. Jin says he will make sure that he gets himself together. The sect's greatest warrior says no matter what society says, there's no denying that Wu Gunsang has true talent. He also says, if he is raised right, he won't be behind the successors of the three great sects. Then the sect leader intervenes and says he heard Jin has accepted the Emi sect's proposal of marriage for Wu Gunsang. Jin says that it's true. The sect leader says marriage with the Emi sect is not bad, and asks if the bride is the disciple of Ran. Jin says that she is her youngest disciple. He also says there are rumors that she has both beauty and intelligence, not a bad match for Wu Gunsang. But he still has some concerns because of Ran. Ran is desperate to catch up to the Qingchang sect. If Wu Gunsang marries her youngest disciple, they may be the ones to be devoured. That's why Jin has rejected the proposal until now. But the sect's greatest warrior comforts him and says they have no choice. They can't keep being enemies with the Emi sect in such a small territory. Since Wu Gunsang is the only hope of the Qingchang sect, he is given very special care. Meanwhile, Wol is still outside Wu Gunsang's residence. It's his first time seeing the real thing, but the layout is exactly the same as the one from the underground cave. The front gate is locked, but Wol knows exactly how to break in. Wol jumps on the roof, but he hears two guys approaching and lies down. These two monks are upset that Wu Gunsang is using isolation training as an excuse to be alone with women. One of the monks wonders if one of their disciples is with Wu Gunsang, while the other is trying to keep him quiet. Wol is shocked to hear that Wu Gunsang brings women into the sect. It's unimaginable to be with a woman in the sword training hall. The two men leave, and Wol takes a moment to gather his thoughts. There's bound to be someone who's different on the inside wherever you go, he thinks. The night comes, and Wol is ready to make his next move. He runs along the building and breaks his way in. He can't find Wu Gunsang anywhere, though. Wol decides to crawl through the vents, hoping he will find a way to Wu. In another room, we see swords lying around, and under the vent in that room is a man lying with a woman. Wol looks through the vent and sees the man. It's Wu Gunsang. From the vent, Wol can tell that he is on a whole other level compared to Gu, the Blood Shadow Group captain. But he is still human, so Wol thinks if he hit the death pressure point, he will die. Wol lowers a rope from the vent and tries to wrap it around Wu, but Wu wakes up. Wol knows he has to act fast and pulls the rope. Wu is lifted up, but he cuts the rope with his hand. Wu faces Wol and asks who he is. Wol answers by drawing his blades. Wol attacks Wu, but Wu is not bothered. He blocks Wol's attack with 2 fingers. Wol is shocked by his power and Wu counterattacks. Wu doesn't stop there. He attacks again with full force. Wol defends, but he feels like he may faint from the energy he is using to block. He can't believe how someone can do all this with bare hands. Wol knows he is running out of time to escape. It will only get worse. Wol tries another attack with his blade, but Wu blocks it again with 2 fingers. Wu praises Wol's skills. Wu asks Wol who hired him, but Wol is too tired to answer. Wu laughs and asks if that girl's father sent him. Wol is confused. We get a brief summary of Wu Gunsang's life. Learning martial arts was always easy for Wu, but though he was extremely talented, he wasn't having fun. Wu became disinterested in training and became interested in women. But one night, he met a woman who became his biggest mistake. After his drunken encounter with this woman, she took her own life, and as punishment, he was forced to spend a whole year training in isolation. Now Wu is face to face with Wol, who has spent most of his life training to kill him. But Wu thinks Wol was sent by that girl's father to avenge her death. Wol has no idea what Wu is talking about, and can only focus on how overwhelming he is. Every ounce of energy seeping out of Wu is intense and terrifying. It almost seems as if he's made of thousands of blades. Wu rushes Wol and attacks. Wol is using a ton of energy just blocking Wu's attacks. Wol is able to sneak in a kick, and his tricks are really annoying Wu. Wu counters Wol and sends him to the ground, hoping to deal the final blow. Wol is able to dodge the attack, and he runs for a blade. Wol fires the blade at Wu, but it's blocked. Everything Wol does is blocked, but he has no choice but to keep attacking. Wol's attacks are blocked yet again, and Wu reveals the Qingchang secret technique. 72 sword waves. Wol knows he's in trouble, so as Wu is rushing towards him, Wol grabs the woman Wu was with to shield him. Wu is annoyed yet again, so he attempts to strike Wol with his sword. As he's being attacked, Wol remembers telling Yayo that only time would tell if he was a scapegoat or a wolf. Wol uses this as motivation to fight back. Wu is surprised Wol was able to defend the secret martial art technique of the Qingchang sect. Wol learned it to death in order to survive. He's confident in demolishing it. Wol uses the swift mind technique to maneuver around Wu. Wool sees a window and takes his chance. Wool sends his sword right through Wu's chest. Wu can't believe it. Wool has completed the objective and avenged the Blood Shadow group. There's panic and unrest in the sect. The bells toll inside Wu Gunsang's residence. We see Jin devastated. He doesn't understand how something like this could happen. Then, the sect's greatest warrior realizes something. He tells the sect leader that they need to dispose of that girl. The sect leader questions how he could suggest disposing of a disciple of the sect. The sect's greatest warrior says Wu Gunsang's reputation is on the line. If word got out that he was with a girl during isolation training, his reputation would hit rock bottom, as well as theirs. This idea is upsetting to the sect leader. The sect's greatest warrior sees that, and says what's done is done. He says since Wu Gunsang is dead, their sect's reputation will collapse if nothing is done. He thinks there must have been someone who heard the assassin, someone that would benefit from the fall of Wu Gunsang and the Qingchang sect. The sect's greatest warrior says they must not let that happen no matter what. But as the sect leader thinks how to respond, they are interrupted by their brothers. They say they cannot, no matter how important the sect's reputation is, it's not as important as a human life. The sect's greatest warrior says at this rate, forget catching up to the Shaolin or the Wudong. Their gap will only widen, and they will be reduced to some mere sect. And as they ponder over that statement, Jin gets up with his son's sword. He begins walking and approaches the disciple. He says, as a disciple of their sect, I'm sure you understand. The disciple cries, and Jin says you should have helped him. The disciple begs Jin to spare her life, but it's too late. The sect leader runs to Jin and asks, what have you done? Jin says he had no choice. Wu wasn't just the hope of the Qingchang sect, he was his everything. He can't just stand by and watch as his reputation crumbles. Jin says he will accept any punishment for his actions. Now, at the Emi sect, Ran receives a message. She cannot believe that an assassin actually killed Wu Gunsang. She is furious that all the assassins weren't captured. Her plan to rule the Qingchang sect has been ruined by her backup plan that was no longer necessary. Zhang Hua says they need to find and eliminate the assassin responsible, because they might know the secret. Ran says the Qingchang sect has already asked for their help. She asks Zhang Hua to gather the others. She wants them to set up the inescapable net immediately. Ran turns to Young and says she must be overjoyed now that the wedding is cancelled. Young says of course she's not happy. She just lost her husband. Ran's not sure if she's being mocked, but the disciple exits. Out in a rural area we see a farmer strolling down the road. The farmer asks what's going on, and the two men say they're looking for a criminal who has committed a grave sin. They demand the farmer identify himself, and he says his name is Trejo. He lives in a nearby village, and he's heading home after today's farming. They ask how he could be done so early, and Trejo says he finished cutting weeds early. They decide to let Trejo pass, but as he walks by, one of the men notices something off. He stops Trejo and asks how he could be so clean after farming. If you cut weeds, there must be some sort of trace, especially on the sickle. The farmer gets nervous, and the men accuse him of being the assassin that Ran said killed Wu Gunsang. They fire off a signal and call for backup. The man's suspicions were correct. It's Wall. He orders his men to capture him. Wall reveals his true identity and fights back. Wall stares the man down and reveals his new weapon. He begins choking the man and asks, "Who is this Ren you speak of?" The man says Ran is the Abyss of 9 Calamities, the leader of the Emi sect. Wall asks if she gave the man a direct order. The man says she ordered all disciples of the Emi sect to help the Qingchang sect capture the assassin, no matter what. Wool asks if the Emi sect was always that helpful towards the Qingchang sect. The man says no, and thinks to himself, his backup should be here any second. Wool tries to put the pieces together. It has to be someone who knows Wu Gunsang, and is inferior to him. Someone who has the patience to invest 7 years' worth of time, as well as possess enough wealth to pour a huge amount of money into the plan. Wool concludes it has to be Ran. Backup arrives, and they rush towards Wool. The man thinks he's about to be saved, and tells Wool he's done. He threatens Wool again, and Wool has had enough. Wool finishes them all. Back at the Emi sect, it's reported that the assassin has broken through the martial artists' encircling net, and has escaped. This gives Zhang Hua a headache, as this means the assassin is getting stronger. He says they will pursue him with all their forces, But then Young intervenes and says no. She says they won't be able to capture him that way. Zhang Hua asks Young what she means by that. Young says the fact that he hasn't been caught with an inescapable net means that he possesses skills greater than they expect. If we continue to chase him like this, we will only be seeing the back of his head. Zhang Hua asks Young for a better idea, and Young says they need to predict where he will go next. She has an idea of where he might be headed. The assassin has to be exhausted, so it's likely that he will return to the place he feels safest. That is probably the place where he was raised as an assassin for a very long time. She says they've found that the location where the Blood Shadow group raised the assassins is somewhere around Batang. Zhang Hua is annoyed with how smart Young is, but confirms that the area was being provided with many supplies. Zhang Hua says they will head to Batang and try to beat him there. They were quick to locate Wall and are chasing him down. They know he's injured, so they believe he won't last long. Wool runs up the wall and thinks he can lose them. He doesn't understand how they can predict where he's going. When Wool looks back at them, he locks eyes with Young, the mastermind behind this plan. As Wool continues running, he realizes things have gone quiet. He wonders if they have given up, but as he looks back, he sees a large burst heading right towards him. There's a large explosion. As the dust settles, we see the Qingchang sect's greatest warrior. The warrior realizes his attack was vicious and careless. He needs to capture Wool alive so they can find out who ordered the assassination. He commands his disciples to see if Wool is still alive. Watching from above is Zhang Hua. She spots Wool and rushes to attack. The Qingchang sect's greatest warrior notices that Zhang Hua is attacking with the intent to kill. On their search, they find an entrance that leads underground. They believe this is where Wool went. The Qingchang sect's greatest warrior orders his disciples to climb the rope down. The assassin must be captured alive, he says. After watching the Qingchang sect, Zhang Hua orders her disciples to do the same, but she wants the assassin dead. Both sects make their way down, and they're shocked to see this is where the Blood Shadow group raised their assassins. Then, the Qingchang sect's greatest warrior makes another shocking discovery. He sees an exact replica of the Qingchang sect. Zhang Hua notices the building too, and gets nervous. A Qingchang sect disciple also notices, and gets angry. He tells his master they must not let this slide. The Qingchang sect's greatest warrior knows this means Wu Gunsang's assassination has been planned for a long time, and it's impossible to maintain such a facility without someone's assistance. He believes there had to have been someone protecting them. Zhang Hua watches and is speechless. The warrior begins laughing and tells his disciples that capturing the assassin is their main priority right now. He reiterates that he must be captured alive. The disciples understand his terms and begin their journey. Zhang Hua approaches the warrior and says she will command her disciples to do the same. The warrior also tells her to capture him alive. He says you can do whatever you want to him, but he must be captured alive. Zhang Hua nervously accepts his requests. As she walks away, he says if the assassin loses his life, he'll be very upset. Someone has clearly looked down on their sect. He plans to hunt them down, even if the perpetrators are one of the 5 great sects. Zhang Hua says he has nothing to worry about. The two aren't even facing each other, and Zhang Hua was nervous. She knows that he is suspicious of the Mi sect. She walks away sweating and knows she has to find the assassin before the Qingchang sect does, no matter what. Young explores the cave and senses danger as soon as they entered. Everyone wants to capture the assassin, but this is his home. She thinks she knows both sects are out of their element down here. The Qingchang sect's greatest warrior finds the real one's base. He looks around and notices how massive this facility is. As he walks through the base of the real ones, he doubts assassins made this by themselves. He can't piece together who could have helped them build something like this. He finally reaches the last room in the base. The warrior walks in and immediately starts looking for clues. He brushes his hand against the wall and finds a secret pressure plate. This unveils a hole in the wall, and inside the wall is a golden tube. He opens the tube and reads the message inside. He's found the request to assassinate Wu Gunsang. Enraged, he can't believe someone destroyed the Qingchang sect's future for a measly 500,000 yang. Then, off to the side, he notices an even larger hole in the wall. He walks in and sees a book sitting on a table. But this isn't an ordinary room. This is a pit with thousands of snakes. He walks towards the table and looks at the book. It's a book from the 9 Demon School. He grabs the book and believes the Nine Demon School is the clan that disappeared a very long time ago during the War of Heaven and Demons. As he thinks about the situation, the search for Wool continues. The Ching Chang sect disciples find grains of rice on the floor, and they think he's nearby. They tell each other not to let their guards down, as you never know when the assassin will attack. They walk away together, but one of the disciples falls behind. He should have stayed closer to the group, because sure enough, Wool attacks. The other disciples don't notice because they still can't believe the assassin lived underground. One of the disciples believes the assassin must have cheated in his battle with Wu Gun Sang. He thinks there's no way Wu could have lost an honest battle, and Wool didn't appreciate that, so he takes care of him. Now, the others notice their fallen friends and begin to scatter, giving Wool the advantage to take them out one by one. One disciple remains, and though he is afraid, he dares the assassin to show his face. Wool has a little fun with him and turns the torches off. The other group of disciples is having no luck. The Ching Chang sect disciple Ming thinks if running away was his sole purpose, he would have done whatever it took to outrun his pursuers and hide. But instead, he's lured his enemies into the domain he knows best. He believes Wool is trying to fight until the end in the environment he's most familiar with. Ming wants to be the one to capture the assassin, as it would catapult his reputation in the sect. He begins giving orders to the other disciples and wants them to follow him in pairs. And above everything else, he wants them to keep their guards up. But with his next step, Ming steps on a pressure plate. He yells for everyone to watch out, as a fury of arrows fire at them. Ming didn't expect to walk into a trap, and some of the disciples are injured. He looks up and sees another round coming. Ming warns everyone again, and can't believe anyone could live in a cave with traps like this. The story continues. See you in the next part.